कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
Today we have with us K. Sachidanandan, who writes in Malayalam. This poet, whose work has travelled across the world. His literary endeavours not only include his poetic works, but his work as a literary administrator, his work as a translator, as a literary critic, as most importantly as a literary activist who has travelled across the world on the wings of poetry. Welcome, Sachidanandan.
Thank you.
Let's start this conversation with a contemplation on the experience of crossing. For many writers, the rite of passage, crossing the self and the locale is the hardest. In your case, you seem to have effortlessly transcended this, and because at a very early age, how was this possible at a very early age, this crossing?
In fact, I was, as perhaps you know, part of a new movement in poetry, which was initiated not by me really, but by my seniors like Dr. Ayyappa Panikkar and then Kakkad and quite a few others. So I was inspired by the examples of the kinds of experiments that they did, and I also wanted to break the existing conventions and go beyond the status quo and create a new kind of poetry with a new idiom which would try to capture the complexity and the multi-layeredness of the experience of our times. And probably my voice was fresh, and also it resonated with the young minds of the time, and that could be one reason why I was accepted very early in my life as perhaps a significant kind of poet in Kerala. And then of course my travelling outside Kerala, or my poetry travelling outside Kerala had also a lot of people behind it. Again, Ayyappa Panikkar was chiefly responsible for introducing me to Indian poetry and world poetry in general, because he got me invited to the various poetry festivals in Bharat Bhavan in Bhopal and some of the festivals that ICCR held in Delhi, and that was my introduction to poetry by writers of other languages of India, and also poetry by writers abroad. Even though I had read many of them, I happened to meet them for the first time during these various festivals and individual encounters.
Talking about reading poetry, in the 70s and the 80s, you and your contemporaries had this great encounter with world poetry. You translated a lot of them into Malayalam. So how do you look at this? Like, in your own transitions, how did this experience, what was the role of this?
Actually I started my translations in the 60s. I had started translation even in the school. I was doing Shelley and Keats and Romantics and all that. But later I began to take translation seriously in the late 60s, when a group of poets launched a magazine called Kerala Kavita, which was a poetry magazine, and my first serious translations were done for this poetry quarterly. I was translating Chairil Anwar from Indonesia, Benu Herbert from Poland, and quite a few other poets for that quarterly, along with my keyvells, my friends who also kept translating Octavio Paz and Senghor and quite a few other poets from other parts of the world. And in the 70s, there were also certain political compulsions, because I was also part of a political cultural movement, and so I began translating a lot of Latin American poetry and African poetry and a lot of European poetry, which was in some sense political, because it had a kind of socialist orientation. And so these translations were done not purely from an aesthetic kind of point of view, even though I loved them and still love them as poetry, but also from a semi-political perspective. And that was meant first to awaken the consciousness of the people who read them and to make them dream of a different kind of world, a more egalitarian kind of world. At the same time also to provide the young with certain models of how politics can become a theme of poetry and how good poetry can be written. Of course, we had a lot of political poetry earlier too, but when I look back at them, I feel that they were, as poetry, they were not as good as we would have liked that to be. And so we wanted to provide some really fresh and great models of political poetry, of Bertolt Brecht, Pablo Neruda, Cesar Vallejo, Paul Celan. So those kinds of poets got translated during that period. So and they did have an impact on my poetry also in some sense, because I was also, along with my friends, looking for new ways of saying things, new ways of expressing my experience. So our idiom was also impacted to some extent by what we were translating, while what we were translating was also impacted by our own style and our own way of looking at poetry and constructing poetry.
When I look at the trajectory of your poetic career, I find that you're coming to Delhi, especially as the the position of editor of Indian literature at the Sahitya Academy. I find that there is a kind of flowering from during that time. Internationally, nationally, your poetry gets translated. How do you look at this question of availability of opportunities for Indian language writers?
Yeah, definitely. Being in Delhi has done a lot to my poetry in many senses. One, that I began to have a kind of dialogue in poetry also with the whole Indian tradition, because that is when I began to write all those poems about the Bhakti and the Sufi poets, for example, something like 14 or 15 poems. And I also began to write about the life in Delhi. So it gave me a lot of fresh experience and fresh perspectives, ways of looking at life. Especially what I would call modern life in the city and its tumult. On the other hand, it also gave me a lot of opportunities to meet writers from other languages, Indian languages and also foreign languages, because Academy was a major meeting place and Delhi itself was a city, and it continues to be a city where writers from different backgrounds and different civilizations come and they speak, they interact with people, they read their works. So that way I think it really gave me a kind of break in my writing career. That was when of course my poetry had been translated into some languages even before, especially into Hindi and Gujarati, even before my coming to Delhi. But after that they began to be translated more widely, because there were a lot of writers who got interested in my poetry because I was taking part in various readings, and they wanted to translate me, and I permitted them to translate them. And this happened not only with Indian languages, something like 14 languages my poetry has gone into, also foreign languages. I had a reading in Rome, for example, when for that a lady, Rosanna Gatteschi, who is a very senior dramatist there, had translated 5 of my poems. So she got so much interested in those poems that she wanted to translate more. And I didn't know that she was translating more, only she went on asking me to send her more poetry. But after 5 years, she said, last 5 years I had been working on your poetry, and here is a collection of 120 poems in Italian, which she translated from English. But then she came to me to Delhi, and we sat together, compared them with the originals in Malayalam. And similar things happened with other languages also, like German and Arabic and French and recently Irish. All this happened partly also because of my being in Delhi. Definitely it has helped me.
You've been using the medium of English. I'm just trying to look at English as a language of mediation, and the kind of political implications that it has in a culture, in a country like India with its diverse, culturally diverse kind of space. Like, how do you look at this? Like this
Whether we
position?
want it or not, English is what unites us, as one of the characters of Rushdie says. Not that we perhaps wanted it, perhaps we wanted an Indian language to play that role, which no Indian language unfortunately has yet been able to. And so English continues to be a kind of link language. It seems to bring us together on a platform, and so getting translated into English often happens to be the first step of being translated into other languages abroad and also languages within India. So that way, my translating my own poems, some others have also done it, but mostly I have myself done it, and they were done mostly because very many magazines wanted my poetry, and so I thought, okay, I would translate a few, and then they accumulated, and then I had these 4 or 5 books in English. So English as a link language, as a language that mediates, as a language through which poetry or fiction, whatever, travels into other languages. It has a role to play in the Indian context.
Looking at literature in the context of other different languages, in the context of other arts, fine arts and performance arts, like what is administration in the context of literary affairs doing in this country, and what are your views on that?
I think that art administration and literary administration are very different from what we generally understand by administration, because there are no orders given, there are no orders taken. I never believed in bureaucracy and tried not to be a bureaucrat, a literary bureaucrat actually. Even though I got things, I was mainly an organizer. I would, more than an administrator, I would call myself, the way I was when I was secretary, an organizer of literature. Because I would organize, seminars and symposia, organize readings, and bring writers together to translate each other's work. So I was mainly facilitating the kind of fraternity that I had always dreamt of among the Indian writers, and providing them with platforms where they could come together and they could say whatever they wanted to say. And so I think that was the way the administrator in me, if at all there is one, worked. And not at all like somebody who would order somebody to write something or translate something. I never did that. So by not administrating, I think I made myself a useful administrator.
Coming to extending this question a bit to these literary conferences and festivals that are mushrooming in our country and in other places, and you go for many of them, like you've traveled across the world, to these festivals. What do you think is the relevance of this, and how inclusive are they?
I must have taken part in at least one score of festivals inside India and outside India, and as you said, they are literally mushrooming, because now almost every Indian city has a festival. Goa has, Kolkata has, Jaipur was the model for many of them, and Bangalore has one, Chennai has one, Delhi has one. So, and abroad, of course, there are famous festivals. I started with the Sarajevo Poetry Festival in Yugoslavia long ago, and then, there was the Berlin Festival, there was Medellin Poetry Festival, quite a few others. There is no point in naming them, but all these festivals definitely helped in bringing me closer to other writers from across the world, trying to understand what is happening just now in literatures within India and outside India, and that has given me a lot of friends, a lot of people who are interested in my writing, and that has also created a kind of interest in me for their writing. So that way it has acted as a kind of connecting link and a shared platform, which is I think the positive side of the festivals. At the same time, you also feel sometimes that what am I doing there, except that you are reading and you are presenting your work before other people, which again is good enough, but you also lose a lot of time. And always, if you look at the representation, you cannot say it is always the best. Even though festivals have their own pressures, and they need to attract attention, and so sometimes they have to go out of literature and bring people who are in politics and other fields of knowledge and discipline. The whole festival culture definitely facilitates a kind of the fraternity of writers. At the same time, sometimes they are not as inclusive as they should perhaps be.
Now we have actually traced your work and life from Kerala to in the international arena. Would you like to close this conversation with a reading of your poetry? That would be.
Since we are talking about travels and about poetry crossing the borders, I have quite a few poems which my travels have given me, and this is one of those early poems I wrote after a visit to China. It's called The Northern Canto. I'm reading just one poem from a series of poems I wrote on Chinese philosophy and culture, and this is called How to Go to the Tao Temple. How to go to the Tao Temple. Don't lock the door. Go lightly, like the leaf in the breeze along the dawn's valley. If you are too fair, cover yourself with ash. If too clever, go half asleep. That which is fast will tire fast. Be slow, slow as stillness. Be formless like water. Lie low, don't even try to go up. Don't go round the deity. Nothingness has no directions, no front, nor back. Don't call it by name, its name has no name. No offerings, empty pots are easier to carry than full ones. No prayers too, desires have no place here. Speak silently if speak you must, like the rock speaking to the trees and leaves to the flowers. Silence is the sweetest of voices, and nothingness has the fairest of colors. Let none see you coming and none going. Cross the threshold shrunken like one crossing a river in winter. You have only a moment here like the melting snow. No pride, you are not even formed. No anger, not even dust is at your command. No sorrow, it doesn't alter anything. Renounce greatness, there is no other way to be great. Don't ever use your hands, they are contemplating not love but violence. Let the fish lie in its water, and the fruit on its bough. The soft one shall survive the hard, like the tongue that survives teeth. Only the one who does nothing can do everything. Go, the unmade idol awaits you.
How do you look at this, from your native Kerala experiences and, going to these kind of different cities? And how do you look at...
Yeah, in fact, for me, it's they are opportunities to understand another culture, another way in which human beings live, another kind of civilization. And so, in my travelogues, I write about places, things that I see, while in my poems, I look at the emotional impact of what I see and the kind of encounters I have, individual encounters as well as the collective encounters I have in those different places where I go. So culture matters a lot when it comes to the writing of poetry, like as you found in this poem on the Tao Temple. So understanding Taoism and then going to a Tao temple, that was part of my attempt to understand Chinese culture. I have also another poem on Confucius and children asking some questions to Confucius and all that. So I think these have been cultural journeys than mere tourist kind of visits to cities and towns for me, and they have definitely enriched my poetry a lot.
Within this limited time, we've talked a lot about your work spanning 4 decades and traveled from Kerala to different cities, different parts of the world. It was wonderful talking to you. This was a complete pleasure. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
सुनो, गाड़ी की चाबी तो ले लो।
आज नो चाबी। आज से मेरा कारपूल स्टार्ट हो रहा है। सॉरी यार, लेट हो गया।
सुनो।
हाँ।
थैंक यू।
थैंक यू क्यों?
मेरी डायमंड रिंग के लिए।
डायमंड रिंग?
अब तुम कारपूल कर रहे हो, इसका मतलब हर साल हम फ्यूल बिल पे 50,000 तक तो बचा ही लेंगे। अब इतने में तो डायमंड रिंग आ ही जाएगी। आखिर बात तो एक ही है ना?
कारपूल करें और सालाना 50,000 रुपए तक बचाएं। ब्रॉट टू यू बाय पीसीआरए इन पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट।
कृष्ण वासुदेव हैं, उनके पिता वसुदेव हैं। उनके विषय में एक अलग उपन्यास मेरा है, वसुदेव, जो देवकी और वसुदेव के विषय में है। उसमें से एक छोटा सा अंश आपके सामने है। वृंदावन में जिस समय रोहिणी, जो वसुदेव की दूसरी पत्नी है, वो बलराम के साथ रह रही हैं और नंद उनको पाल रहे हैं, ये उस समय की बात है। क्या सोच रहे हैं नंद राय? रोहिणी मुस्कुरा रही थी। सोच रहा हूँ भाभी कि इस राज्य में इतना अन्याय हो रहा है और प्रजा कहीं राजा का विरोध नहीं कर रही। प्रजा का धर्म राजा का विरोध तो नहीं है, रोहिणी ने कहा। प्रजा विरोध नहीं करेगी तो कंस के राज्य में जीवित कैसे रहेगी? नंद की चिंता बढ़ती ही जा रही थी। वस्तुतः लोग एक भ्रम में जी रहे हैं कि कंस उनका राजा है। तो कंस हमारा राजा नहीं है? नंद चकित थे। नहीं, वह एक दस्यु है, रोहिणी ने कहा, जिसने महाराज उग्रसेन से ही नहीं, सारे यादवों से उनका राज्य छीन लिया है, उनके अधिकारों का अपहरण कर लिया है। तो हम लोगों को ये समझ में क्यों नहीं आता कि वह राजा नहीं दस्यु है? नंद श्रद्धा भरी दृष्टि से रोहिणी को देख रहे थे, जैसे वे स्वयं ज्ञान की देवी सरस्वती हों। ये प्रजा की जड़ता है नंद मेहर। प्रजा मानती आई है कि राज्यसभा के सिंहासन पर बैठा है वही राजा है, रोहिणी ने कहा। तो वह क्या वह राजा नहीं होता? मेहर, आपको आपके लोग हम सब मेहर मानते हैं और कहते हैं, क्योंकि इसलिए ना कि सबकी सुविधा असुविधा का ध्यान आप करते हैं, सबकी आजीविका की चिंता करते हैं, सबकी रक्षा का प्रबंध करते हैं, इसलिए यहाँ के प्रधान हैं आप, इसीलिए मुखिया हैं। राजा वह होता है जो अपनी संतान के समान प्रजा की रक्षा करता है, रोहिणी ने कहा। वह नहीं जो सारा धन अपने लिए चाहता है, सारा सुख अपने लिए चाहता है, तनिक सा विरोध होने पर दूसरों के प्राण ले लेता है, जो शत्रुओं से तो प्रजा की रक्षा करता नहीं, स्वयं भी प्रजा का भक्षक बन जाता है। कंस राजा नहीं है नंद मेहर, वह एक दस्यु है, जिसने आपकी राजसभा, आपके सिंहासन, आपकी सेना और आपके राजकोष पर बलात् अधिकार कर लिया है। सब कुछ हड़प लिया है उसने। हमें इन सब को मुक्त कराना होगा, तभी यहाँ न्याय का राज्य होगा, तभी प्रजा सुख से जी सकेगी। इसके लिए क्या करना होगा भाभी? सबसे पहले तो प्रजा की चेतना को कंस के कारागार से मुक्त करना होगा, रोहिणी ने कहा। प्रजा का ये भ्रम दूर करना है कि कंस उनका राजा है। राजा कंस नहीं है तो यादवों का राजा कौन है? नंद कुछ संभ्रम में थे। कोई वन में रहकर प्रजा को लूटे और पीड़ित करे तो वह क्या है? वह दस्यु है। और वही दस्यु वन से निकलकर राजप्रासाद में आ जाए तो वह राजा हो जाएगा, रोहिणी ने कहा। इसी भ्रम को तो मिटाना है। राजप्रासाद में रहने, राज्यसभा में सिंहासन पर बैठने तथा सेना पर नियंत्रण कर लेने से तो कोई राजा नहीं होता। तो अपनी रक्षा के लिए सेना किसने बनाई? हमने। उनके वेतन का धन किसने दिया? हमने। उनके सेनापति और राजा के लिए प्रासाद किसने बनाया? हमने। अब कंस नामक एक व्यक्ति ने प्रजा के द्वारा निर्वाचित राजा उग्रसेन को बंदी कर कारागार में डाल दिया और स्वयं उस सिंहासन पर बैठ गया, तो वो राजा हो जाएगा? नहीं। सेना उसकी हो जाएगी? नहीं। आदेश उसका चलेगा? नहीं। पर ऐसा हो रहा है, रोहिणी ने कहा। तो अब क्या हो? नंद चिंतित से खड़े रह गए, फिर धीरे से बोले, मुझे लगता है कि हमें इस सेना से लड़ना होगा जो राजा नहीं, एक दस्यु की आज्ञा का पालन कर रही है। पर वो सेना तो हमारी है, रोहिणी बोली। हम अपनी सेना से लड़ेंगे क्यों? नहीं, हमको अपने सैनिकों का वध नहीं करना है, किंतु ये समझना है कि इस समय हमारी सेना एक दस्यु की यंत्र बनी हुई है, रोहिणी ने कहा। और यदि हम अपनी सेना से लड़ने का निश्चय कर भी लें तो लड़ नहीं पाएंगे। क्यों? क्योंकि कंस जिस दस्यु दल का सदस्य है उसका नेता जरासंध है, रोहिणी ने कहा। वो अपने दल बल के साथ कंस की सहायता के लिए आएगा। इसका अर्थ है कि प्रजा को राजा की सेना पर नहीं, समाज की शक्ति पर भरोसा करना होगा, सहसानंद ने कहा। आप ठीक कह रहे हैं देवर जी, रोहिणी बोली। सत्ता समाज के हाथ में होनी चाहिए, सिंहासन के पायों में नहीं। सिंहासन का अपहरण कभी भी हो सकता है, किंतु समाज की बुद्धि का अपहरण कभी नहीं हो सकता। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि यदि आप हमारा समाज, आज हमारा समाज पहल करे तो सारे सेनापति और मंत्री राजा का साथ छोड़ देंगे। वे बेचारे तो लोभ, भय और मूढ़ता के कारण राजा का साथ दे रहे हैं। मैं चाहूँगी कि मेरा लल्ला बड़ा होकर शक्तिशाली बने, अपनी रक्षा के लिए राजा पर नहीं अपनी भुजाओं पर निर्भर रहे और इस बात को समझे कि राजा और दस्युओं में बहुत अंतर होता है। मैं समझ गया भाभी, नंद के स्वर में कुछ उत्साह जागा। ब्रज के गोपों को राजा की सेना पर नहीं अपने बल पर निर्भर रहना होगा।
पैंट 2 शर्ट ठीक है। बहू
जी
थैंक यू।
थैंक यू।
नई साड़ी के लिए।
नई साड़ी माँ जी?
उबाल आने पर तुमने आज धीमी कर दी। खाना भी तुम बर्तन ढककर पका रही हो, इससे सिलेंडर ज्यादा दिन चलेगा और हम सालाना गैस बिल पर 1,500 रुपए तक बचाएंगे। मतलब आ गई ना तुम्हारी तरफ से नई साड़ी। बात तो आखिर एक ही है ना बेटा।
उबाल आने पर आंच धीमी करें और खाना ढककर पकाएं और सालाना 1,500 रुपए तक बचाएं। ब्रॉट यू बाय PCRA इन पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट।